Hi, everybody. Dan Illman, Mike Beer, taking a look back at the 2023 Run for the Roses, the Kentucky Derby. All hail Mage! He pulled off the upset for Gustavo Delgado. Let's take a look at the order of finish for the Derby. Mage, Mike, didn't break great. We were worried about that going in, considering his relative inexperience, but it wasn't as disastrous a start, perhaps, as some of his other races, and he made a very strong move on the turn and was powerful on the stretch.
Yeah, it didn't seem like the little bit of a slow start here. Obviously, it didn't affect him this time. The pace was actually pretty fast in this Derby. And it also didn't seem like it was his fault, Dan, at the start. He just sort of got pinched back a bit between horses on either side of him. And after that, I mean, you're right. He made a really strong move around that final turn, but he traveled strongly throughout this race. I mean, Javier Castellano had two handfuls of this horse all the way around the track. The trip was clean. He came up on the outside of the top of the stretch, and you could tell from about the quarter pole that this horse was going to win this race.
And he got a very strong pace to attack. Check out these fractions: 22.35 for the opening quarter, 45.73 for the half, verifying Kingsbarns. They battled it out early and they paid the price along with Reincarnate.
Yeah, the pace was really fast in this race. It also, helped everybody else in that it kind of felt like, most of the horses that were sort of, up front and contesting that pace were horses that, maybe had some real questions to answer in this race. Verifying, who is a nice horse, but you had to be concerned about how far he wants to go. Kingsbarns, a lot like the winner Mage, very lightly raced, and they did not take back in this race, Dan. I was a little bit surprised with the ride that Kingsbarns got, because you could tell first time through the stretch that this pace was going to be fast. And Jose Ortiz, he did not back off at all. He went right after it.
The Jeff Ruby Stakes winner, Two Phils, showed that he could successfully transfer his synthetic form to dirt. He ran an excellent race, was the only part of that hot pace that was still around at the finish. And it's never an ideal situation in the Derby. You always have to maybe make a decision that's questionable. I'm sure Jareth Loveberry would love to have waited another 4 or 5 strides before gearing Two Phils up for his final run. But in the position he was in and the way that horse was traveling so sweetly, when the rail opened up, he had to go for it. Two Phils ran great, I thought.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I have no knocks on the ride this horse got at all. He was up close. Yeah, he was up close to that fast pace. But at least for the first part, Dan, he was able to sort of take a hold and sit behind the leaders in there, maybe a couple lengths off it. Obviously, it would have been better for them if they were a little bit further back, but that's not necessarily his running style. All in all, this horse was in a good spot throughout. They took over when they had to around the final turn, and it gave them a real chance to win this race. It just didn't work out in here. You could obviously easily argue that if the trip was a little bit different, maybe he would have won. I didn't look at the race that way, but Two Phils ran great.
No, Loveberry gave that horse a very, very nice ride. He got him relaxed on the backstretch into a very nice rhythm. The hole opened up. It was a bit early, but he had to go for it. He did, and Two Phils almost took them to the wire. As for Angel of Empire, Mike, he fell behind this fast pace, which was to be expected. He came with a nice late run. I think it was yet another progression for this horse, who retains a tremendous amount of promise.
Ran well in here. He's another one who got a very good trip in this race with the fast pace in front of him. I thought Flavien Prat did everything right, Dan. Took this horse back. He was basically in tandem and inside of Mage all the way up the backstretch. Mage went first around the final turn. Prat got this horse right out behind him. They followed him to the stretch, and they tried to kick him down. And you know what, Dan? They didn't even make it that close. I realized at the end that Angel of Empire, was sort of within range, and it felt like he was making up ground. He really wasn't. He was never going to beat Mage in this race. He still ran a good third.
Let's talk a little bit about Tapit Trice, who at 9-2 finished 7th. Again, this is a horse who, again, needs, I think, to get outside a little bit quicker. He was sort of down on the rail, trying to make up some run, getting some dirt in his face. He's still very inexperienced. He ran on a little bit at the end. I think he's better than this, and I won't be surprised if he shows up with an improved effort in the Belmont.
Yeah, that's how I look at him too. I mean, ultimately, nothing about this Derby really was run to suit this horse, I guess, except for the fast pace, which is in theory supposed to help Tapit Trice. It's just not good for him when, he breaks down towards the inside. He's got a bunch of horses in front of him, and he's just being ridden right from the start of this race, Dad. I mean, Saez just put this horse to basically to a drive out of the gate, just trying to make sure he didn't get too far back outrun. I mean, he was never really involved in the running. He didn't even finish that strongly through the stretch, just sort of stayed on evenly down the outside. Not his best performance, but I think he's way better than that.
Derma Sotogake, one of the 3 Japanese-based horses in this year's Kentucky Derby, the winner of the UAE Derby. He did not get off to a great start in this race. The jock said he wanted to get a little bit more forward. I'm not sure if he would have had the speed to have gone with these horses early in a 45-3 half mile, but he ran on pretty well to be 6th. He's going back to Japan. We likely won't see him for the rest of the Triple Crown.
Yeah, I mean, I get that there could have been a different plan for him. I'm certainly wouldn't take the position that if he had broken cleanly and gone forward, that it would have worked out better for him, Dan. I mean, this pace was fast. So he made a little bit of a left turn out of the gate there. It left him, sort of back off the pace. But after that, after the start, I saw no trouble for this horse at all. I thought he got a very clean trip and a perfectly good ride in this race. He was making a move around the final turn ahead of Mage and ahead of Angel of Empire, and he never really reached contention and he didn't finish that strongly. I mean, he didn't get off to a great start. After that, I didn't see any issues for him. He ran fine to be 6th. He never looked like he was going to win.
Confidence Game finished 10th. Do you think it was a better than it looked 10th, considering that he hadn't run since the Rebel in February and was relatively close to that fast pace? If he does reel back in 2 weeks in the Preakness, we might see a tighter Confidence Game who could get a better pace setup.
Yeah, agreed. I didn't think this was a poor performance at all. He's another one who showed speed. He kept right up close down on the inside. And he did look, it kind of felt like all that time off had him a really fresh horse, because he didn't, to me anyway, didn't settle that great in the first part of the race. He even got, shuffled back a little bit around that final turn. He got tired at the end. He was supposed to get tired at the end, considering this pace. Not a poor performance at all from this horse.
Did you see anything from Disarm or Hit Show that made you think these horses had some excuses? They would have been a little bit closer if they had a better trip.
I just think they're both progressive horses, Dan. I saw nothing wrong with the trip that Disarm got. Joel Rosario gave this horse a great trip from start to finish. And I thought Disarm ran really well. He was only 4th best in here. Hit Show, if I'm being honest, I would have liked to have seen Manny Franco not be so on top of this horse from the start. I understand that he had the rail and they were probably worried about that, but he rode this horse first time through the stretch like he wanted to be forward. And this pace was too fast for that, but he never really backed off it. I actually feel like Hit Show, he finished 5th. I think he ran one of the more underrated races in the Derby, and I think he could be really tough in the Belmont Stakes.
Did you see any of the also rans with significant trouble where you want to just draw a line through the race, or did they pretty much place where they belonged?
I didn't really see too much trouble. I will say, who knows how much of a difference it was really going to make, because you can call into question how good this horse actually is. And I understand what his rider was trying to do in this race, but Raise Cane, who wound up finishing 8th, this horse, he was the only one, aside from the horses who were involved in the pace, and maybe you want to go a little bit easier on them. Raise Cane was the only one from off of it who felt like they were going to work out a trip, and then all of a sudden around the final turn, it really didn't work out for him. He got into a lot of traffic. He got blocked at the top of the stretch. By the time he got clear, when that field was coming down to the 8th pole, he really didn't have that much run after that. But he was the only one who I thought had some trouble throughout the running.
Let's take a closer look at our Kentucky Derby winner, Mage, and the connections have done a sensational job with this son of good magic. He didn't make his debut until late January. He was beaten by Forte, who was unfortunately scratched the morning of the Derby in both the Fountain of Youth and the Florida Derby, although he broke slowly in both of those races, and he exploded in the Kentucky Derby, a 105 Beyer speed figure. Walking in the footsteps of his broodmare sire, Big Brown, he ran really well. The Preakness is up next. You can make the case that this horse is continuing to improve. He's razor sharp right now, and all of a sudden he goes from being a 15-1 chance in the Kentucky Derby to obviously one of the horses to beat, if not the outright favorite, even over Forte perhaps in the Preakness.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be interesting to see how well he can back up this Kentucky Derby, Dad, because listen, and we talked about him a lot in the lead up to the Derby. There was a lot working against him going into that race the first Saturday in May, but he had shown talent right from the start. His 2 losses to Forte were both fine performances, but I think it's pretty clear to everyone watching the Derby last Saturday, this horse took a huge step forward. That was a very, very strong performance. And if he's going to be able to back that up, he's going to be really hard to beat in 2 weeks.
Let's take a look at the prices for the Kentucky Derby. Mage and Javier Castellano, $32 winner, 2 fills. Ran very, very well. He paid $10.44 to place. Angel of Empire, the beaten favorite, really lost nothing in defeat. He's still a nice horse that I really think is going to have a big second half of the year. 8-3-14. Mage wins the Derby, on to Baltimore.